Hello and welcome back to English Snap. I am so happy you are here with me today. Today we are going on a journey. We aren't going to a crowded city or a warm beach. Instead, we are traveling far, far north. We are going to a land of giant icebergs, dancing lights in the sky, and a history that is as deep and cold as the ocean itself. Grab a warm cup of tea. Sit back. Let's talk about the incredible story of Greenland. Have you ever looked at a map and seen a giant, white shape at the very top of the world? That is Greenland. To many people, it looks like a land of nothing but snow. But my friends, there is so much more to this place than just ice. Imagine a world where the sun does not set for months in the summer. Then imagine a world where the sun does not rise at all in the winter. In the winter, the only light comes from the moon and the stars. Sometimes the sky turns green and purple. These are the northern lights. They look like magic, don't they? Greenland is the largest island in the world. But it is also one of the loneliest places. Most of the land is covered by a thick sheet of ice. This ice is so heavy that it actually pushes the land down. If you stood in the middle of Greenland, you would be standing on ice that is 2 miles thick. It is a world of silence. It is a world of power. But why do we call it Greenland? When you look at it from space, it is mostly white. This is one of the great secrets of history. It is a name that was chosen to trick people. We will talk about that very soon. For thousands of years, humans have looked at this icy land and thought, can I live there? It seems impossible. It is too cold. There are no trees for wood. There are many dangerous animals like the great white polar bear. Yet people did find a way. They didn't just survive. They built a home. As we start our story today, I want you to close your eyes. Feel the cold wind on your face. Hear the sound of ice cracking in the distance. This is not just a story about a place. It is a story about the human spirit. It is a story about how we find beauty in the most difficult places on Earth. Are you ready to go back in time? Let's begin. Long before there were countries or kings, there were the explorers. About 4,500 years ago, a group of people looked across the frozen water from North America. They saw the mountains of Greenland. They didn't have engines. They didn't have metal tools. But they had courage. We call these first people the Sakak. Imagine living in a world where every single thing you need must come from the animals you hunt. To stay warm, you wear the skin of seals. To eat, you hunt whales and reindeer. To make a knife, you must find a special kind of stone and chip it until it is sharp. The Sakak were masters of the Arctic. They knew how to read the clouds to tell the weather. They knew how to follow the tracks of animals in the snow. They lived in small tents made of skin. Can you imagine sleeping in a tent when it is 30 degrees below zero? It is hard for us to even think about. After the Sakak, another group arrived. We call them the Dorset people. They were very special. They were famous for their art. They carved tiny, beautiful animals out of ivory and bone. They carved bears, seals, and birds. Why did they do this? Maybe it was to show respect to the animals that gave them life. These early people lived in Greenland for hundreds of years. But then, something happened. The climate changed. The weather became even colder. The animals moved away. And slowly, the Dorset people disappeared. They left behind only their stone tools and their beautiful carvings. Have you ever wondered what happened to them? Did they leave? Or did they simply fade away into the snow? When we look at the ruins of their small camps today, we feel a sense of wonder. They were the first to call this icy heart home. They proved that humans could live at the edge of the world. They were the first shadows in the snow, and their story is the foundation of everything that came after. Now, let's move forward in time to the year 982. We are going to meet a man with a very big personality and a very red beard. His name was Erik the Red. Erik was a Viking from Norway, but Erik had a problem. He had a very bad temper. He got into a fight in Iceland and was told he had to leave for 3 years. He couldn't go home to Norway, and he couldn't stay in Iceland. So he sailed west. He had heard rumors of a land hidden in the mist. When Erik reached the southwest coast of this new land, he didn't see just ice. He saw green grass in the deep fjords. He saw mountains that looked like the ones in Norway. He spent 3 years exploring. When his time of exile was over, he went back to Iceland. He wanted people to come with him to start a new colony. But how do you convince people to move to a cold, distant island? Erik was very smart. He gave the land a beautiful name. He called it Greenland. He thought, if it has a good name, people will want to go there. It was the first marketing trick in history. It worked. In the year 985, 25 Viking ships sailed toward Greenland. The journey was very dangerous. The ocean was full of storms and ice. Only 14 ships made it to the coast. But those people brought everything with them. Cows, sheep, horses, and their families. They built 2 main settlements. They built houses with thick walls made of stone and grass to keep the heat inside. Erik the Red became the leader. He sat in his great hall at a place called Brattahlid. Imagine the scene, my friends. The Vikings were used to the sea. They were warriors and farmers. They looked at the green valleys near the water and thought they could build a new empire. They didn't know that they were living on the edge of a world that was about to change. They were proud, they were strong, and for a while they were successful. But as we will see, the green land was not as friendly as Erik promised. What was it like to be a Viking in Greenland? You might think of fighting and dragons, but the reality was much quieter. It was a life of hard work. The Norse settlers were mostly farmers. They spent their summers working very fast. Why? Because the summer in Greenland is very short. They had to grow enough grass to feed their cows and sheep through the long, dark winter. If the grass didn't grow, the animals would die. And if the animals died, the people would starve. But they weren't just farmers. They were also great hunters. They hunted walruses. This was very important. Why? Because of their tusks. Walrus ivory was like gold in Europe. The Vikings in Greenland would trade this ivory for things they couldn't find on their island, like wood, iron, and wine. They even built beautiful churches. They were Christians, and they wanted to feel connected to the rest of Europe. They had a bishop and big stone cathedrals. Even though they were thousands of miles away from Rome or London, they dressed in the same fashions. Archaeologists have found old clothes in Greenland that look exactly like what people wore in Europe at that time. They wanted to stay civilized in the middle of the wild. Think about their daily life. The smell of wood smoke inside the longhouses. The sound of sheep bleating in the fields. The taste of dried fish and salty butter. In the winter, families would sit around the fire and tell stories, the famous Norse sagas. They talked about gods, heroes, and their ancestors. They lived this way for over 400 years. That is a very long time. For comparison, that is longer than the United States has been a country. They were a part of the European world, but they were the most distant part. Every year, they looked at the horizon, waiting for a ship from Norway to bring them news and supplies. But as the years went by, the ships came less often. The ice began to grow. The winters became longer. The world was getting colder, and the Vikings were becoming more and more alone. Have you ever felt lonely even when you were with your family? That was the feeling of the Norse in Greenland. The silence of the north was starting to close in. Around the year 1450, something strange happened. The Norse settlements in Greenland became silent. When ships finally arrived from Europe much later, they found empty houses and broken churches. The people were gone. This is one of the greatest mysteries in history. Where did they go? Why did they leave a home they had loved for 4 centuries? There isn't just one answer. It was a perfect storm of problems. First, the weather changed. This period is known as the Little Ice Age. The temperature dropped. The ice in the ocean became so thick that ships from Europe couldn't get through. The farmers couldn't grow enough food for their cows. Imagine watching your children go hungry because the grass won't grow. It must have been heartbreaking. Second, the economy changed. In Europe, people started buying elephant ivory from Africa. Suddenly, the walrus ivory from Greenland wasn't worth much. The Vikings lost their way to make money and trade for iron. Third, there were new neighbors. As the ice moved south, a new group of people followed it. The Thule people, the ancestors of the modern Inuit. The Norse and the Thule were very different. Sometimes they traded, but sometimes they fought. The Norse stayed with their old ways of farming, while the Thule knew how to hunt on the ice. The Norse were struggling, while the Thule were thriving. Some historians think the Norse slowly moved back to Iceland or Norway. Others think they stayed until the very end, fighting against the cold and hunger until the last person was gone. When we visit the ruins today, like the Valsey Church, we can still see the stone walls standing strong against the wind. It is a sad place. It reminds us that even the strongest people can be defeated by nature. The Norse story in Greenland ended in silence. But while one story ended, another one was just beginning. The people of the ice, the Inuit, were about to become the true masters of the land. While the Norse were struggling to survive, a new group of people was moving across Greenland with confidence. These were the Thule people. They are the direct ancestors of the Inuit people who live in Greenland today. The Thule were different from anyone who had lived in Greenland before. Why? Because they had the best technology for the Arctic. They didn't try to farm cows in the snow. Instead, they embraced the ice. Imagine the kayak. It is a small, fast boat made of animal skin and wood. It is perfectly designed for hunting seals in icy water. The Thule also had the umiak, a larger boat for moving families and hunting whales. And perhaps most importantly, they had dog sleds. Can you imagine the sound of 20 dogs barking as they pull you across the white snow? This allowed the Thule to travel huge distances very quickly. They followed the animals. When the seals moved, the people moved. They were flexible. They were smart. The Thule culture was rich with stories and music. They used drums made of animal skin to play rhythms that sounded like a heartbeat. They told stories about the mother of the sea, a spirit who controlled the animals. They believed that everything in nature, the rocks, the wind, the animals, had a spirit. This helped them live in harmony with a world that seems so harsh to us. They built homes called igloos out of snow for travel, and more permanent houses out of whale bones and sod. Inside, it was warm and full of life. They wore clothes made of polar bear fur and bird skins. They were perfectly dressed for the coldest place on Earth. By the time the Norse disappeared, the Thule had spread all around the coast of Greenland. They didn't see the ice as an enemy. They saw it as a highway. But Greenland was no longer just a mystery in the mist. It was now a part. They saw the ocean as a garden full of food. My friends, this is a very important lesson. The Vikings tried to change Greenland to fit their way of life. But the Thule changed their way of life to fit Greenland. That is why they survived. They became the heartbeat of the island, and their culture is still alive today in every town and village in Greenland. For a long time after the Norse left, Europe almost forgot about Greenland. But in 1721, a man named Hans Egede set sail. He was a missionary from Norway, which was then part of Denmark. Hans Egede was looking for the lost Vikings. He wanted to see if they were still Christians. When he arrived, he didn't find any Vikings. He only found the Inuit people. But he decided to stay. He started a colony at a place he called Godthab, which means Good Hope. Today, we know this city as Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. This was the beginning of the Danish period. At first, it was about religion and trade. The Danes wanted seal oil and fur. In return, they brought coffee, sugar, and iron. But this change was difficult for the Inuit. Their traditional way of life began to change. The Danish government took control of Greenland. They created a monopoly, which means only Denmark could trade with the island. For a long time, Greenland was kept closed to the rest of the world. The Danes thought they were protecting the Inuit, but it also meant the people had less freedom. Over time, the two cultures began to mix. You can see it in the houses. Have you ever seen photos of Greenland with bright red, blue, and yellow wooden houses? Those colors were actually a code. The red houses were for the doctors or the church. The yellow houses were for the hospital workers. The blue houses were for the technical workers. As we look at this period, we see a story of two different worlds coming together. There was respect, but there was also a loss of identity. The Inuit language and traditions had to fight to survive alongside the Danish language and laws. Fa European Kingdom. It was becoming a modern place with schools, hospitals, and stores. However, the people of Greenland began to ask a very important question. Whose land is this? Does it belong to the king in Denmark? Or does it belong to us? The 20th century changed everything for Greenland. During World War II, something very big happened. Denmark was invaded by Germany. Suddenly, the connection between Denmark and Greenland was cut off. Greenland was alone again. But then the United States looked at the map. They saw that Greenland was in a very important spot between North America and Europe. The Americans built huge air bases, like the one at Thule, now called Patuxent. Suddenly, thousands of American soldiers were in Greenland. They brought trucks, big machines, and new ideas. The people of Greenland saw a world outside of Denmark. They saw that they were part of a much bigger global story. After the war, Denmark took control again, but things were different. In 1953, Greenland's status changed. It was no longer a colony. It became a county of Denmark, like a province. This gave the people more rights, but the Danish government also tried to modernize Greenland very quickly. They moved people from small hunting villages into big apartment buildings in the cities. They wanted to build a fishing industry. For many Inuit, this was a very sad and difficult time. They lost their connection to the land and their sled dogs. They felt like they were losing their soul. But from this pain came a new strength. In the 1970s, a new generation of Greenlandic leaders began to speak up. They wanted home rule. They wanted to make their own decisions about their schools, their language, and their land. In 1979, they won. Greenland got its own parliament. They changed the names of their towns back to Greenlandic names. Godthab became Nuuk. They designed their own flag, a beautiful red and white circle that looks like the sun rising over the ice. It was a time of waking up. Greenland was finding its voice. They were no longer just a cold island at the top of the map. They were a nation, proud and ready to walk their own path. They were learning how to be both modern and Inuit at the same time. And so we arrive at the present day. What is Greenland like today? It is a place of incredible beauty and modern life. In Nuuk, you can find gourmet restaurants and high-speed internet. But just outside the city, the wild ice is still there. People still go hunting for seals, and the sled dogs still howl in the night. But Greenland is facing a very big challenge: climate change. The ice sheet is melting. This is a problem for the whole world because it makes the sea level rise. For the people of Greenland, it means the ice they walk on is becoming dangerous. The animals they hunt are changing their patterns. However, there is also hope. As the ice melts, it becomes easier to find minerals and oil under the ground. Greenland is becoming very important to the whole world again. Leaders from many countries want to be friends with Greenland. The people of Greenland are also moving closer to full independence. They have self-rule now, which means they control almost everything except for their army and foreign policy. When you listen to the young people of Greenland today, you hear pride. They speak Greenlandic, Danish, and English. They are artists, scientists, and hunters. They are the children of the Vikings and the Thule. They carry the history of the ice in their hearts, but they are looking straight into the future. My friends, we have traveled through thousands of years today. We have seen the first hunters, the brave Vikings, the mysterious vanishing, and the birth of a modern nation. Greenland is a reminder that the world is a beautiful, fragile, and strong place. It reminds us that humans can survive anywhere if we have courage and if we respect the land. As the northern lights dance over the ice tonight, let's remember the story of this great land. It is a story that is still being written. And who knows? Maybe one day you will travel there and see the icebergs for yourself. Thank you for joining me on Englishmindcast. Until next time, keep dreaming and keep learning.